So this session, we're going to continue our ELSI work and conversations, but we're going to talk in the realm of robotics. So first, as before, I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves. Jesse, go right ahead.
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Kirkpatrick. I'm a research faculty at George Mason University in Virginia. Let's see, what else about me? I co-direct the Mason Autonomy and Robotics Center. It's a long story, too long for today, but my background and training is actually in political philosophy and as a social scientist, then moved to an applied physics lab, and now I work in technology, so autonomy and robotics. And I do a lot on responsible AI. So super glad to be here, and I'm really excited about today.
Outstanding. Alexis.
Hi, I'm Alexis Block. I am a tenure track faculty member here at CASE in the Electrical, Computer, and Systems Engineering Department. I'm also in the Human Fusions Institute, which is all about technology in the service of humanity. I direct the Safari Lab, which stands for Social and Physical Human-Robot Interaction.
Ah. Outstanding. All right, so we're just going to have a conversation here. So Jesse and Alexis just talk about Alexis's work, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. So Alexis, do you want to start us off with you sent me a handful of articles, which I read through about half of them and skimmed the rest. So I think I have a good sense of your research and what you do, what you're up to, what you teach, what the motivations are. But maybe, do you want to start us off with maybe 5 minutes or so, just kind of sharing what you do, why you do it, and how?
Yeah, sure. So I like to explain what I do with a little bit of self-deprecating humor. I think there are a lot of people who make very useful robots to do things, and I am less interested in robots that do things and more interested in creating robots that can be our friends and that can support us, right? I think someone else is making robots to do the things. Once they accomplish that, we're going to want to create some kind of an emotional relationship with these robots, whether that's a friend, whether that's a caregiver, whether that's just, a sounding board. So I'm kind of thinking, once we accomplish that, what's kind of the next step? I'm really interested in creating empathetic, responsive robots. So robots that can understand and intuit how we're feeling and respond to us appropriately in a similar way to another person.
Yeah, that's really great. And so, So when I think of robots, I think of two things, and I think that there's these polarized visions of what robots are, right? So there's this sci-fi vision of robots as dystopic and scary, and no knock on the Boston Dynamics dog next door, but it doesn't give it's not very huggable. Right?
I could not agree more.
It's not huggable. It's a little bit, it does not give off a kind of approachable vibe, I would say. And then on the other side, there's kind of robots that we think of that are maybe the Iron Giant, or but I think that robots that do engender empathy or kind of call out for or WALL-E, kind of human interaction, right? And so I guess this is a broader question of thinking about design choices or how we orient our work in terms of think about how users are going to interact with those robots, right? And kind of counteracting the sort of the dystopian sort of sci-fi scary robot vibes that a lot of people think about. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think Hollywood has not been our friend in terms of human-robot interaction, right? It engenders a lot of negativity and fear of robots. I think it also provides this misconception that we are very near robots achieving sentience, which we are extremely far from. But you bring up a really good point that when I am thinking about designing robots, which we really like to do in my lab, there are two main considerations. So we have to think about the physical embodiment of the robot. So like the robot morphology, which as you kind of alluded to, can have a really big positive or negative effect on user reception of that robot, but also the robot behavior. And so we kind of have to decouple this problem and think about which can we tackle first, which should we tackle first. So often I like to think about the robot morphology first, and really the best case scenario, the best thing we can do is put it in front of our intended users as soon as possible. So, you hear all the time, test early, test often, and that's really what I've done in a lot of my research. Even if it's just, sketches or photographs or videos before we can actually have them interacting with a robot, finding out what do you like, what don't you like, what can we change to make it feel more approachable. Once we kind of solidify on the physical embodiment of the robot, then we can go through and kind of iterate through those robotic behaviors. And again, getting those in front of users as early and often as possible, and diverse users, and finding out kind of what is an appropriate behavior is really kind of the MO of my lab and what we do.
Yeah, that's really great. I have a few questions related to your lab and the type of robots that you work on. I saw some great photos. You have a great website. There's these great photos of really cool robots, and then of your team from PhD students to undergrads. And it's really fun, and I think it does give a good representation of robots that are approachable, and I think hit those two prongs that you mentioned. But one question that I have though before is kind of following your line of thinking is so you talk kind of what some folks might call kind of like user-inspired design, right? User-inspired design, and you mentioned a really important part of that is not like sort of imagining what the user may have, but actually getting user interaction, user engagement. So how do you choose those people? How do you reach out to the community? How do you know which stakeholders to engage? How do you ensure that it's representative? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And kind of when I'm reviewing papers, that's something that I often kind of nail other researchers on, because it is so easy and it is so convenient to recruit 18 to 24-year-olds who are highly educated, because that's what you have access to in a lab, right? I really think that that's a mistake. So I go out of my way to kind of find a more representative user base. So when I was recruiting students as a PhD student, I rode the subway lines, and I would post flyers in bus stations and subway stations and things like that, because that's where people were commuting. That's where I could access, not necessarily, only the Ivy Tower educated individuals, but I could access kind of everyone. And then in terms of, so that's kind of one way, and really going beyond the university bubble, right? So I wouldn't just post in the subway stations nearest to the university, but I would really ride them to the ends of the line, ensuring that they had an accessible route to the testing station. So if I was testing at the university, you want to make sure that whatever route they take is accessible via public transportation. But then also thinking about stakeholders, I think it's often easiest to think about just primary users, but in my lab and in my class, we often think about secondary and tertiary users as well. So primary users might be who would be, interacting on the daily with this robot. Secondary might be who might pass by it, and tertiary might be like who could be impacted by the integration of this robot, who might be replaced, who might be, kind of dealing with this kind of thing. And you want to get all of these individuals involved in your, physical embodiment design and also behavior.
Yeah, that's great, because we often think of sort of like what are kind of like we think of them maybe as sort of small things that might be barriers to recruitment, like excessive, like being on a transportation line, right, or having access to a lab. That's really cool, and I really think it's great that so you're already doing like a whole bunch of ELSI things without having to call them ELSI things, right? Like you're thinking about
Trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear. You think about inclusion, accessibility, participation, right? Access, all of these things that are really important when we think about how we want people to engage with technology, and also I think how we want to design and build technology. And I often think about that in my own work. I also would say, and I'm going to get to a question in just a moment, is that I think it's really cool is that, Pooch mentioned that when we think about ELSI, we think about not only the first order effects, but maybe second or knock-on effects, right? Think of it as sort of concentric circles that go out. And I think that's really great that you talked about not only, you broke it into three, right? So the primary, secondary, and tertiary users. I think that's really cool. So one of your robots here, I'm reading from my notes from your paper, is that you have like a hugging robot, right?
HuggyBot TM.
Yeah. So I have questions about HuggyBot. There are these really in your papers. There's these really great photos of HuggyBot. It's like, can you just tell the audience a little bit more about HuggyBot, what inspired HuggyBot, what it is?
Yeah, sure. So HuggyBot was my doctoral thesis. I also started actually my master's degree for my master's thesis. It is the first human-sized interactive hugging robot with visual and haptic perception. Awesome. Thank you.
It's really awesome.
This
so cool.
project was created because, unfortunately, when I was a freshman in undergrad, so first year, my father passed away very unexpectedly and very suddenly. And I was 19 years old, doing the best I could. My friends were trying to be as supportive as possible, but 19-year-olds, they don't really have the empathy at the time, and through no fault of their own, to kind of understand the depths of the emotions that I was going through and the type of comfort that I needed, right? I went to school in Philadelphia. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So my family, who knew my dad, were very far away. And I didn't at the time have the financial means to kind of fly home and see my family when I needed to. I remember I just spent like winter break at campus. So what I really wanted was a hug, but you hug a 19-year-old for, more than 5 seconds and they're like, ew, get off of me. So I was like, wouldn't it be great if I could make a hugging robot that could, either emulate my dad's hug or I could have my mom send me a hug, right? So that was kind of the inspiration for this whole project. And it lasted many, many more years than anyone thought it would. Initially, I think I started that research in 2016, and before the pandemic, everyone was like, if you want a hug, just go hug your friend.
Right.
Then the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, there might be reasons why you can't hug someone. But really, I realized that there were physical limitations, temporal isolations, reasons why you wouldn't have necessarily access to a friend or a family member or a loved one who you might want to get that kind of supportive embrace from. So I saw like an inherent need for this kind of technology beforehand, and I think even now we're past COVID, there are still reasons why you might not be able to give someone a hug whom you love. And so that went on for many years, and kind of exactly what we're talking about. I ran some initial studies as a master's thesis, and then I realized that the commercially available robot platform I was using was not designed for close social physical interactions. So I decided to build a new robotic platform, and I started designing things. I ran an online user study because I wanted to catch as wide of an audience as possible. I just put lots of photos about what the robot could look like, what the robot could wear, all these kinds of things, and I let the users decide how the robot should look and what it should wear. And then I started iteratively developing the robot behaviors. So initially I kind of thought, all right, well, this is much more interesting than I am. I don't mind. I agree.
I beg to differ, but it does sort of stop the show for a moment, doesn't it?
Understandably so.
Okay.
I was going to say, no questions yet. I had a question about her hug robot, and that was, why not just a pet, a live pet, a cat, a fish, an iguana, a dog?
Yeah, no. I get this question.
Cats and their hairless dogs.
I get this question often. You are not wrong. I am afraid of animals. I am also allergic, right? So there's that mistake, but also one major thing that I identified was that there's something called deep pressure touch therapy that you receive when, for example, you're hugged, when you are a child and you're being cradled. Constant deep pressure touch therapy for 20 seconds or more releases the hormone oxytocin in your body, which is the hormone associated with social bonding, right? And there's plenty of health benefits. It can lower the cortisol levels in your body, which is the stress hormone. It can lower your blood pressure, strengthen your immune system, all these kinds of things when you receive this beneficial deep pressure touch therapy. So when you hug a stuffed animal or a pet or something like that, you get the benefit of hugging that item, that object, that animal, but you don't receive that deep pressure stimulation back.
Well, that might explain why, as a single guy, I sleep with four 80-pound pit bulls and a calico cat. And we share a twin bed, so believe me.
Well, then I think you are getting that.
Pressure, hugs when I don't want them at 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody decides to lay on my chest.
Oh, yes, we will use the microphone for questions here.
Here's one.
Do you want to?
I'll jump down.
All right.
Here you are. And
Thank you.
hold
I
it
just
and
wanted
pass
to
it.
build up on that last concept, because one of the most widely adopted robots was Paro, the harp seal.
Oh, yeah.
That was developed in Japan. And I haven't hugged the latest version, so I don't quite know whether a harp seal can hug back or how it responds tactily. But it's pretty clear. The general issue I want to get to is we are trying to make robots huggy so that the robots hug us, but humans hug things unilaterally quite frequently. And I wonder, in fact, whether the problem is that in care robots, which we have a poster about here, we're allowing the humans to humanize the robot. We don't have to worry about making the robot more human. The human will do that, and that creates potential harm as well. Dependence on social robots and on romance robots and so on. So, do we really have to worry about going beyond Paro, or because humans will hug them anyway?
Humans will hug them anyway. I like
You're
that one.
correct. Humans do hug Paro. But again, bringing it back to that kind of physiological benefit that you receive, you don't get that from Paro. You get other things, right? So the study that you're talking about, I'm familiar with. It was more about older adults in nursing facilities and worrying about their mental cognition and making sure that they stay active and aware and caring for an object, caring for something, helped them kind of retain their mental faculties for longer, right? It wasn't actually about those physiological benefits that they received. To the best of my knowledge, they haven't investigated that. So I was really kind of grounded in this psychology research, and I did run a study to show that on a physiological level, this hugging robot can affect you to a similar level as a human. But you are also correct that humans have a tendency to anthropomorphize robots, which is something I was acutely aware of. So I always insisted on never gendering the robot. I always called the robot an it, those kinds of things. And throughout all of my experimentation, people actively chose to gender it. So I would call it, it, the robot, that kind of thing. And they would identify it as either he or she. It was very interesting to see that kind of behavior. So a couple of the things design decisions that I made with this robot, I did not want anyone to think that I was trying to trick them into thinking that they were hugging a robot. I'm sorry, I didn't want them to think I was trying to trick them into thinking they were hugging a person. They were not. I designed the robot inherently to look robotic, right? And I always called it a robot, so they were acutely aware that it was an inanimate object, but still they attributed personality traits to the robot. So if the robot, there were some studies when I was investigating some of the behavior, and I intentionally had it, release them before they kind of indicated that they were ready to be released. And they would say, oh, the robot doesn't like me. Or if it held on to them too long, they would say, oh, the robot's misbehaving, and those kinds of things. So you're absolutely right. You don't actually need a robot to look inherently human-like or anthropomorphic. People will attribute these human-like behavior characteristics, personalities, and even gender a robot, even if it looks inherently robotic.
Jump on in here, Jesse. If you
Yeah,
have,
I wanted to follow that line of thinking, and that of course, we can. I think that there are some maybe general psychological principles about how we anthropomorphize things that's bears out in the empirical research. But as I was reading this, right, is that what's really cool about yours is, and you've been mentioning this, is like sort of the padding, the vision, the haptic sensors, right, is your use of kind of the deep psychology and psychological insights paired with physiology, right, our physical responses and what that does to us psychologically. But so I'm wondering, though, is that not everyone is built the same, right? And I know that you're anticipating this. And so here's a question I have, is that we may have, so how do we account for that, right? How do we account for even variation among individuals, whether it's across psychological types or those that are neurotypical or atypical, and the wide spectrum in between that. So, and then throw in culture and some other, how do you?
There are so many questions in there.
4 questions I counted in my one question. Take any one that you want.
All right, we're going to do our best. You are absolutely right. There are inherent differences between individuals and their preferences.
Yeah.
Could be based on culture, could be based on just a myriad of reasons why people might have different preferences. But also it's important, I think, to note that there might be differences in preferences for a single individual at different times of the day or given different contexts, right?
Good point.
If you are in private or versus, if you're in a more public setting, how you're feeling, if you're upset and you want to be comforted versus if you're, feeling happy and you're fine, right? So just think of all of this right now in a hug context, but we are still kind of applying these same general principles to some of the new work that we're doing in my lab. As part of my doctorate, I created the 11 hug commandments or 11 design guidelines about the both the physical and the behavioral parameters of a robot. But they do generalize, in my opinion, to more so to just human robot or even human computer interaction, right? It's all about exactly what you mentioned earlier, human-centered design, right? So not just how the robot should look, but how the robot should behave. And we want to get these robots and their behaviors in front of as diverse of an audience as possible. So if we are designing something for individuals on the autism spectrum, don't just use them as test subjects, right? Engage them in the co-design process as early and often as possible to understand kind of what their preferences are. And also one thing that we kind of created is we collected a very large data set for this hugging robot, and we did identify that people have different preferences. People have different body shapes and sizes. So we created an adaptive way to adjust to these different users. We created a probabilistic behavioral algorithm to kind of account for these different user preferences. So we'll stop there, and I think there's other kind of.
We got a question back there, and then there's one up here next.
I want to pick up on Peter's point about the tendency to anthropomorphize and the idea there's a certain horror here. And in fact, the better you get at this, the greater the sense of horror increases. And let me put it in a different way psychologically. So I guess you're kind of familiar with psychology. It's in terms of shaping, right? So we already have quite good evidence that there's been some very deleterious effects on social interactions caused by the shaping of those interactions by social media, right? And the more you succeed, the more we're going to have people interacting with things that aren't actually humans, and that's going to shape how they form physical, intimate bonds, maybe in a way that will make them less and less attuned to how to actually connect to a real human. So I realize this is kind of a long way down, and I don't argue with the uses you've got, which sound great if a bit ameliorative, but what about this? Do you do you tune into this sense of horror? Do you see where this is coming from? Why you said the movies haven't been kind to us, but the movies, this is what they pick up on, this horror of the idea that we're confusing something that isn't human with the human.
I understand it. I think that it's a scare tactic, and I think that there is a little bit of an unnecessary panic around it, but I do empathize and understand where this viewpoint comes from, right? I think that we as robot designers have an inherent responsibility to ensure that our robot behaviors themselves towards other humans are appropriate and responsible, but also that we ensure that people are engaging with our robots in a responsible way, right? So we need to not only, this is something that I've been advocating for quite a bit, is thinking about the unintended consequences of our designs, right? So I would love for in papers to always have this kind of section, and we have limitations, but what about like an unintended consequences section, and how we're going to handle it, right? We can design our robots to expect a certain input and thereby give a certain output. But we also need to be able to handle edge cases, even if those edge cases are not something that we want our users to do. So for example, just to kind of conceptualize this topic, let's say I have my hugging robot and someone comes and hits my robot, which is not what it's designed to respond to, right? We need to understand that happened and have our robot kind of correct that human behavior and like, hey, I don't appreciate that, or that's not really what I'm for, right? Because as you're right, people could develop inappropriate behaviors or actions towards a robot that then might kind of propagate towards their human-human interactions, which I think is kind of where one of your concerns were. The other concern that I heard is that there is a concern that people may become over-reliant on these robot interactions and thereby not seek out other human-human interactions, which I think was another concern I heard. I see where this concern might come from, but I would like to offer an alternative side, that there are some individuals who are not comfortable seeking out human-human interaction at all for a variety of reasons that are extremely valid. And research has shown that a lack of social interaction can be detrimental to both your physical and your mental well-being. And I ask you, is it better to allow these individuals to suffer in isolation because we want them to be reliant on human-human interaction? Or if we can provide them some kind of relief, even if it is a robot, is that not better to help these individuals who are currently actively struggling? I think it's worthwhile.
We have a question right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, mine was actually kind of stemming off of his with like the whole like how social media increases. There are studies showing that like social media and the isolation of people being on their phones now all the time, being locked inside, like increases like decline in mental health almost. So like the worry of like having a robot at home where like you said, like people will become more dependent on it. Like I feel like just people will see that more, and like there's like, I'm just worried that like with an increase of like a dependent like robot at home, like people won't like you said, won't like seek out other people for like help. And like it is kind of like a psychological thing where like you want a lot of people to talk to. You don't just want like the robot, and your mental health like will decrease if you just go to the robot all the time. Like I'm worried there would be like a decrease in people seeking help from like friends and like parents or like even family. And some people don't have that, like you said, where like the robot can almost like replace them almost. I don't know. I'm trying to like word this correctly.
I was also going to say Jesse can jump into either one of you.
So it sounds like it's can affective can affective robots that are designed to facilitate social interactions actually reduce them, right? And I think that this is really evident in your research that that these are questions that you're tackling, that you're obviously and clearly attuned to. And I think at the end, it's there are kind of two things going on here. Is that One is that it's an empirical question, right? And that we're getting better and better data to see if that's the case, right? Is it actually the case that, for example, social media and robotics are of like types, or are they different in kind, or are they different type? We need more research and research funding to answer these types of questions. And then in addition, what are the kind of broader impacts that might be embodied as considerations in the type of research that you mentioned you said we have the limitations section, but then we need the unknowns or the hypothetical.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
I love that
right?
idea, adding that to the
Yeah,
section on
yeah.
unintended consequences potentially.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. There is research that shows that too much time on social media can have negative effects to your mental health, especially for individuals in your age group. But I think that there is a difference between I'm going to call it social media scrolling, which is kind of a 2D interaction, versus the physical embodiment of a robot. So research has also shown whether it's a puppet, a person, a robot, even a stuffed animal, that physical embodiment of having an agent in the room with you has benefits over just interacting with a screen or talking on the phone, right? There is a bit of a difference there. So I do want to kind of to address that question. I do think they are not necessarily exactly like types. I think they are different. But another thing that we do is we are consciously aware of these questions, these concerns, and we actively think about them in our design process. So a few of the projects that I have in my lab right now are actively keeping humans in the loop. So we do have a robot that operates autonomously, but kind of summarizes the exchange that the robot has with the person and sends that information to a remote mental health professional, a therapist, psychologist, social worker, that kind of thing, who then kind of prompts our robot on what are appropriate, responsible interactions that the robot should give kind of next time they engage. So that might be something like, hey, this person, from the exchange, the person is expressing these types of concerns. Maybe next time recommend that they reach out to a friend, right, to kind of get that engagement that they're missing. So we are thinking about these questions and designing that into our robotic system.
Now, we've got Jessie for a little bit longer, but Alexis, we need to let you go here
I have
because, yeah, exactly. It was very kind of you to come so close to your class time. But if we could quickly thank Alexis. And then, Jessie, I'm going to keep you hostage for a moment longer, if I may. But you should probably scoot because I don't want to make you late. Then it will be my fault. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we'll still take some more questions, but Jessie's fielding them. Yes, go right ahead.
Maybe just a follow-up of what we have been just discussing in terms of, how much a robot should turn into a human being. Have you watched that movie, Her?
Her?
Yeah. And it's not an embodied, right? It's a voice. It's a voice system. Similar
but
to
it's
Siri.
15-year-old movie, so it's normal. I mean, probably, but it's still fascinating to have that movie 15 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm just wondering where we should, as researchers, set the boundary, because I agree with Alexis. Some people are in isolation; they need such solutions. But consider a robot that talks to you, looks like a human, huggable, and never argues with you. Always says that you are right. Right. And then, this is going to lead to a lot of narcissists, I guess, right? This may also backfire from the other point of view. So I think there should be some point that we should set the boundaries so those types of things are not going to happen, because that's just a imaginary life, right? It's not really real life. People will get used to it. And at some point, not only the ones who are in isolation, other people will also want to have similar relationships because it's easy. It's easy to manage.
Yeah, so I hear two questions here, right? The first is, are there limits to, or are there design choices that are going to inform embodied robotics with respect to what they appear like and how human they are, right? And then the second question is contingent upon the answer to the first, which is, if there are limits, what are those boundaries, right? So I think I'm going to take an unpopular sort of opinion and an unpopular ELSI opinion and give maybe a little bit more of a libertarian type of perspective, which is one that people are often surprised as like someone who is a big advocate of ELSI and responsible AI, that I'm actually sort of very pro-innovation in a kind of libertarian sort of streak, and that's that I think that these are empirical questions at the end, right? I would advocate that we in tandem push our design considerations and design choices, right? So maybe it is to having an embodied system that is very similar in likeness and kind to a human, right? Including an agentic agent that might be embodied in, so embodied AI and embedded AI is a lot of what I work on. And at the same time, in parallel, have robust research, empirical research, that answers the type of questions of what is this boundary, right? I think the problem is, so it's a sort of like pro-innovation model that has these kind of ELSI guardrails that guide the path. Now, what I think, though, is that often what we have is that we have one and not the other, right? And the issue that I find there is that we'll have innovation without the responsibility, which I think is really problematic, or a really strong advocacy on ELSI that is, I think, problematically precautionary. So that's not a concrete answer to should there be guardrails and what do those look like, but it's, I think, an approach that can get us there. Yeah.
Another hand right there, Mitt. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jesse, design and training question about robots, particularly like personal care robots.
Yeah.
I mean, we think of what is distinctive about human judgment and intelligence as the capacity for theory of mind, which then enables empathy. In terms of just training these items, is it a combination of LLMs that are based upon matching responses to language used by the patient, along with what sensors that attempt to sort of read the emotional, psychological, physical state of an individual? I mean, I'm just thinking that what a human brings to a face-to-face encounter is so much tacit knowledge,
Right.
which then informs, inferences about, that generate theory of mind and empathy and so forth. And I'm wondering, just in terms of design and training,
Yeah.
what are ways in which there is an effort to approximate that? And are there ultimately going to be limits to the ability to do that?
Yeah, so I think that what we're seeing a lot in robotics is what you suggest, which is sort of embedded AI, and a lot of folks are saying, let's put an LLM in it, right? I mean, that's like, I've been on, anyway, it's kind of an increasing approach to. We have a system such as, I'm pointing here to this because it's right here.
right
It's hard not to. Let's put an LLM in it and let it do its path planning and its work and so on and so forth. I think we're really, really far away from anything like a theory of mind with large language models and generative AI, right? Or at least what we think of as a theory of mind that can engender the type of care that you suggest, right? That is sort of social interactions that we have. I also think, and here is like where my pro-innovation gets tied up in like my complicated concerns about the limits of these technologies, right? Is that we can see it very evident here is that these are teleoperated systems, right? Probably if you pushed it over, it wouldn't be able to get back up, or at least not very quickly. So there's limits in terms of two things getting at this. So the first is in just simply the hardware, right? Huge limitations. And then the second is in generative AI and LLMs in particular, right? Depending on the benchmarks and some of the easiest and the most hacked ones, right, that we know that OpenAI's ChatGPT hallucinates probably around 50% of the time. 50% of the time, it's going to produce a hallucination. Lower on some of the other versions of the model, like the vibe coding model, is maybe 40%, but that's still really high, right? If I told you that I'm going to give you a caregiver You admit, I'm just pointing at you. I'm going to give you a caregiver, and 50% of the time, it's going to be wrong. Like,
That'd be a
that's
little
not a great,
off-putting.
right? So I think even before we get to questions of theory of mind, which are really important. And yeah, the question is, might we hit limits in terms of the approaches that we have at present, right? Which at present right now, it seems like it is scaling compute and data and hoping for the best, right? We might be finding limits of that. So there may be limits, but I think that we have just in terms of like fixing rudimentary problems with this. So I'm really skeptical about just sticking LLMs in robots and hoping for the best at present. Yeah.
Pooch, you had a question, then we had another one up front here.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure you knew you were not alone on this balance between innovation and ELSI prohibition. If not for anything else, then if we want to answer these questions empirically, we need to get data from somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can't answer the question unless you have the data. So we have to develop these things, put them in controlled environments, and generate the data for us to be able to look at those. So that's just support for you.
Thank
right?
you. Thank you.
Second point, talking about the anthropomorphization of these devices, we have found, especially in the Department of Defense, that squad mates will treat very unhuman looking robots that are very tightly controlled, very limited in what they can do as members of their squad, to the point where if something happens to one, they will go back to the depot and like, repair my buddy. Yeah. Don't give me a new robot, repair my buddy.
I've heard them having funerals for them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you would take a moment to talk about maybe the psychological impacts of, like, these are mechanical devices. They break down. Right. They just fall apart, right? Or bad things happen to them. And if the barrier for anthropomorphizing a robot is so low, do we have to be concerned about the psychological impacts of what happens when the robot breaks?
Yeah. So two things. One is that I think that I've heard these same anecdotes of. I'd like to see a study on the level of anthropomorphizing and grief among service members, right? Again, it gets down to, what is that level? What does it look like? Is there differences depending upon the design choices, the considerations, the duration in which the squad members have interacted with the robot, at what level, and what theater of operations, under what environments, and so on and so forth, right? There's 15 different research questions that I think are really fascinating there. I don't want to, and I was somewhat dismissive of the fact that there are real concerns here about the potential negative downsides that could occur from unhealthy relationships with machines, right? I mean, that's a given. I had a family member who, for example, had a vehicle that he loved so much, a car. He babied it, took care of it, washed it every Sunday, really pampered it, loved it, and it wasn't he knew it was a car, but there was this level of attention and detail that he didn't bestow upon his children. Oof. Right? That might say something about the kind of sort of psychological makeup of that individual, right? And what we can extend from an N of 1 or 2 or 3. We don't know if it's generalizable. But it does say something, I think, by way of example of the danger that could happen with unhealthy attachments to these systems. And that gets to the gentleman before us, the faculty member from computer science, who asked about her. Right? At the end, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen her, it doesn't end well. It's a kind of sad, it's an unhealthy attachment, and his bubbles burst. Yeah. So I'll leave it there. That's like a small spoiler, but not full. So yeah, I don't want to be so dismissive of these concerns. But again, I think that they're questions that in which we need better empirical data to get an answer to.
Last question right here.
I was going to ask, from what I've drawn, to me it seems like a lot of what ELSI does and embodied robots do, it seems to me very inclusivity related.
Okay, yeah.
I was wondering if and then I guess the future of what your job is.
That's a great question, right? So, so I think you're right, and I have two reflections on that. Number one is inclusivity and diversity a kind of a principle or an important part when we think about the ethical, legal, and societal implications of a technology? And I would say yes, right? That we want technology that works for everyone, right? We want it, and by definition, if it works for everyone or the most amount of people, it's going to need to be diverse. We're going to need to take that into consideration when we're designing it, developing, deploying it, and using it, right? The other is that there are kind of broader impacts with respect to the current federal landscape and hostility towards DEI, which impact, I'm an academic researcher, impact the pipeline of talent. People like you, young people like you who want to get into building robots and designing them. There are programs and requirements, in fact, for some federal grants that encouraged a diverse population to get in the game of engineering and ELSI that are currently under attack, rolled back, and in some cases cut. So I think it's super important. I think it's part and parcel of ELSI considerations, and I think that there's some real downside to not only dismissing those, but bringing them under direct threat, attack, and hostility. That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. A great note to end on, and I certainly agree that doing ELSI without those meaningful words, diversity, equity, inclusion, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I don't know how we could do it with ignoring that. All right, so this is, first of all, let's thank Jesse again. You had to go solo for a little bit there. And again, our ELSI experts will be around all day if you want to ask them additional questions, but we're going to keep moving. We've got a break in this room, but please, if you have not yet, go next door to the exhibits, including there's a HoloLens exhibit where you can walk through the Red Monastery. The robots will be heading back over there. We have a Human Fusions exhibit, many other very cool things, plus the posters the students have worked so hard on. So please do go over there, and then we'll be back after lunch with more talks here. So thank you very much.